So my job as a celebrity producer at Good Morning Britain is that I have to book entertainment guests onto the show each day to come on to talk about whatever it is that they've got going on at the moment. In addition to that, I also have two entertainment hits each day with our entertainment editor Richard Arnold, which we talk about the showbiz, celebrity news. And yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Excellent. Jay?
I think mine's a little bit different because I'm technically like a content producer. So obviously filling the show with things that our audience would enjoy, but that does include guests. So we do have a showbiz team that book a lot of our bigger celebrity talent. But if a celebrity is plugging, then they'll come straight to us. But we're a bit more selective because we don't need guests every day, unlike GMB, which has to have guests every single day.
And I'm the celebrity booking lead at Bauer across podcasts. I also do 2 days at Immediate Media, who look after brands like Radio Times and Good Food. So I'm across a number of podcasts. Most of them record quite far in advance. So we're looking more at the story and what fits the podcast. So, for example, at Bauer, I'm working on Catherine Ryan's What's My Age Again, Pete Wick's Man Made, and one with Tim Campbell about work and career. So we're looking for quite specific guests for those, but that doesn't rule out people who are promoting things.
Excellent. Okay, so obviously all three working with talent, but working with talent in very different ways. So your answers will be different to the questions I asked. So let's start firstly with actually looking at when you think about talent, or when, you know, agencies like ourselves or brands come directly to you with those talent in mind. What type of talent works for your outlet and for the sort of programs that you're working on? I'll start with you.
Household names, in a nutshell. Mainstream household names. You know, we really need people that are gonna, our audience are gonna, if they're flicking through the channels, they're gonna know who it is as soon as they're going past, you know, and they're gonna stop and watch.
And when we say household, everyone will have different views of household. There are a lot of different ages in here. So, you know, there's obviously the reality TV star to the, you know, the big A-listers, etc., etc. So is household big in itself in terms of what's that defined
So
as?
I would say household, for me, is people who you see regularly on TV. So quite often I'll get pitched someone who's got a great social media following, but if they're not on TV, I don't think they necessarily work for us. You know, they're gonna have to have a hell of a story to tell. It will be harder for us to get on.
Jay?
I think we always say that we're aimed at mums traditionally. Like, I think that's sort of the heart brand. If you think of a typical heart listener, they're normally, you know, a mum with a child or in that sort of data space. And I think, again, it's sort of like the household names, like who would your mum know? When I first started at Heart, I think someone once told me that the best guest you could ever book for Heart Breakfast is Stacey Solomon, because she's fun, she's energetic, and everyone knows her. Whether you know her by name or by face, everyone knows who she is. And I think if you have someone on your books or someone you're working with that resonates in the same way someone like Stacey Solomon does, you're the ideal guest for Heart Breakfast.
I have to agree on Stacey Solomon, because not only is she known as a TV face, she's got lots of businesses, she's got a big online following. So for us, again, it's household names, and also we're looking at how people how they do on other podcasts as well. So quite often if I'm pitched someone, I'll have a look and see how they've done on different podcasts they've been on compared to other guests on that pod, to see whether they're going to fly, because that's, for us, it's getting the listeners. So we need to know that they do well and people react well to them.
And if we use Stacey as an example, now Stacey, in my job, is probably one of the names that comes up most from clients. But a lot of my pushback sometimes is, you know, she's great, but she's obviously overused in the sense of she's attached to lots of different brands. So are there rules in place in terms of how often you have guests on? You know, if Stacey's been on a month ago and it's something else and you're like, brilliant, we'll get her back on, or is that like, no, month is too soon?
So for me, it's about, has the story moved on? Is there something new and different for us to talk about from when she was last on? So I actually don't care if Stacey Solomon was on 2 weeks ago. If there's been a major life update or there's something really great that she's going to tell us, why would I not have her back on? You know, and it's actually a great example today was Shirley Ballas. I had Shirley Ballas on today. We only had her on 4 weeks ago, but the day she came on last time was the day that later that day the Strictly codes were announced. So now I've got her first interview on what she thinks about those new judges.
Just to say, we had the guest on that was the new host of Strictly with you that morning, so that was good. Jay?
I think ours is slightly different to that. I think we're a bit more like, let's space out the gap. But that's probably because more about talking points. Like, as you said, if there's a big development in their life or their story, like, let's use Stacey Solomon as another example. If she happened to, have another child, that's a whole new line of questioning that we couldn't have had previously because she hasn't had the baby yet. It will be what your expectations rather than what is actually happening at Pickle Cottage. So I think for us, we probably would give it a bit more breathing room. Like, I think a month's pretty tight for us. But it just depends what the guest is doing, really. But I think we're probably a bit more spaced out than GMB would be.
I'd say for podcasts, you wouldn't have the same guest on again, unless a few series had passed. But I wouldn't rule out having the same guest on Catherine Ryan that would go on Pete Wicks. Like, we'd have Vicky Patterson on both because it's a very different interview. What I would check is how many other podcasts are going out at the same time, because then you're less likely to get people listening to yours because she's already been on Davina and Paloma Faith and that kind of thing. So I would normally check what else they're doing. I did used to work on This Morning, so I've sort of been in a similar situation to JM, and I'd say yes, if there's a massive piece of breaking news, that would justify you having them back. Otherwise, they wouldn't normally have a guest back within, I'd say, 6 months.
Now, when we look at spokespeople and talent, how important are they to you? And when you've got talent, you've got the story itself. How important is the talent in you deciding to take the story, and how important is the story in you deciding to take it? Like, what's the sort of percentage split for you? Or
I think they're both important. I think you've got to have both, really. It's going to have to be an amazing name if the story's rubbish, and equally the other way around as well. So I think they are both very important.
Yeah, I think the same, really. I think it's hard to deviate one from the other, because at the end of the day, you can have the best celebrity in the world, but if they can't deliver the message, what are you guys getting out of it, for example? Because, if Jamie and Amanda are going to go off on a tangent and talk about X, Y, and Z, and we need them talking about A. So I think you have to rely on that talent to be able to bring whatever the PR message or whatever the story is to the forefront, because in the nicest way possible, Jamie and Amanda aren't going to do that, because they don't know what that message is, and they don't know what this person needs to get across or what the brand mentioned they're doing. So I think for us, maybe slightly the talent is more important, but it would be 55 to 45.
I'm probably going to keep my This Morning head on for this because it's not quite as relevant in podcasts, because we're looking more for the podcast theme than what the guest is promoting. But I'd say if it's a really heavy, controversial or like meaty story, then that is really important. But otherwise, it's the name that gets you. So if there's Joanna Lumley, we'll try whatever we can to make this work. If there's a brand attached, there's certain names who will go, oh yes please, and then you'll do your best. Obviously, there's always compliance. Podcast doesn't have the same rules with compliance, which is nice, but with TV and radio, you have to get around compliance, so you have to have a really strong link between the guest and the story.
So we talked about Stacey obviously being an ideal kind of guest. Flip it, and what's the type of guest that just doesn't work? You don't need to name celebrities, but the type of celebrity that just, if, for example, we've got a really good news story, the client's budget doesn't stretch, and this is the guest that's available, you would go, sorry, no, they just don't fit. And obviously, Jay, with Heart, they've got to fit that mum audience, but are there any other types of guests, sports stars or, obviously politicians you like, but, anyone that just doesn't work for you?
I think it is those social media stars that haven't broken out into the mainstream. I think like Joe Sugg is a great example of, like, before he did Strictly, would I be booking him? I don't know. I don't know if my audience would know him. even though he's got a great social following. So, yeah, I think that will be my answer for that. But then otherwise, for us, we're quite broad.
Heart don't touch politicians. It's just a thing. Like, again, that's not our audience. That's not what people are tuning into Heart for. And I think at the end of the day, yeah, social media stars as well is a bit different. But it depends also who resonates also with Jamie and Amanda. Like, if there's a social media star that happens to have been on Amanda's Instagram algorithm for the last 2 weeks, we'll take them, because she genuinely is consuming their content and the conversation will be great no matter what brand they have to push. But I also think what's important to always remember with things like Heart is what they're coming on to talk about is one thing, but what the conversation will amount to is another. And that is guaranteed to happen. There will never be just one constant thread of conversation. So as long as that person can hold that second part of the conversation, I would say that's where it cuts through to me as a producer or someone who books that guest, is can they hold the rest of the conversation and not just the brand mention they have to get away.
Yeah, again, it's a bit confusing with the whole podcast thing, but you're right, because sometimes one of our presenters will say, so Pete Wicks will say, I love this singer Ren, who I hadn't heard of, I'm ashamed to say. And then we looked him up and he had a massive following and had a really strong story with his mental health. So it's like, oh, actually, that could really work for us. If I'd been offered him, I might not have taken him to Pete, but now I would be more interested. So I think you've got to sell them to us as well if it's someone you don't think we'd automatically go for, but it's those household names that will hook us in.
And when we talk talent, obviously we don't just mean celebrities. For us, talent is quirky guests, and we've had like a professor of happiness before, and we've had Jay, we're talking to you about like a sleep expert that we're working with for the World Cup. So are there any other types of talent that work for you, those kind of quirkier kind of guests, not brand related, but that can work for, that we should be thinking about when we're sort of thinking, how can we get onto the air?
Yeah, I think something that we find is working for us now is if there's a guest where there's going to be a bit of production involved. So if it's an opportunity, we're on 3.5 hours a day now, and for some of the year it's 4 hours. So there's an opportunity to get our hosts out from behind the desks and they're having to do something active, fun. Then that is something that, I think helps a pitch stand out.
Yeah, I'm completely in the same boat in the regard of like those quirkier sort of pitches are perfect for Heart Breakfast because, the in-studio chat's one thing, but, it always looks better if you get Amanda in Leicester Square doing something stupid. And that's what flies on our socials. That's what does well. And it's things like that where you have that happiness coach, right? What's a happiness coach? Well, you sort of can make that what you want. And if the client is willing to give us creative control, even better, because then we can shape it and we just need the guest to be like, right, Jamie and Amanda, here's what you're doing today. Why are we doing that? Because of this. And then, then we have control of the actual output. And at the end of the day, we know how good radio sounds. Like, otherwise we wouldn't be in the jobs that we're in. So if we can craft the content, it's going to be even better for both sides of the deal, I guess.
For me, it's more if it fits the theme of the podcast. So tomorrow we're launching the prenup with Tyler West and Molly, which is all about things they should basically learn about and agree on before they get married. So a sleep expert might work for that because, they're going to be sleeping together for the next however many years. And, what should they do? Should they have separate bedrooms just in case? Or, so we could do something fun with that. Getting brand mentions in might be a bit trickier, because you have to make it smooth within the chat, but that's the same for everyone, isn't it?
Well, you're coming on to my next question, which is obviously there's a lot of brands in this room. That's our job. A lot of my job and my team is to sort of make sure that our clients understand how we can get the brand, across on air. Any advice to those that are in the room now about, because everyone would love, 17 mentions of their brand. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But, how does it work in terms of getting the brand on each of your sort of media outlets?
So I would say that you can only ever have one brand mention. But the way that you can get more out of the interview is if that spokesperson or celebrity has got a genuine connection to what it is you're working on, because then it can naturally be involved in the conversation. So then more interview time will be spent on that. Whereas if there's a really awkward connection, say if it is a case like an amazing guest we want to get on, and we work really hard to get it on air, but they are not connected to that plug at all. It will be one question, very short, and then we're going to talk to them about everything else going on in their life, So if you've got that connection to what they're talking about, that is just a winner.
Yeah, I think that dynamic sort of combination of the guest has to fit the context is really the be all and end all, because we're regulated by Ofcom. We can get one brand mention away before it starts to sound like an advert, and I think the best people are the people that you get who can really just slide it in, and it's fluid and it flows. Like, we used 72Point when the Winter Olympics started, and we booked Amy Fuller, who was an ex-snowboarder. She was the presenter actually on TNT Sports in the end. And Jamie had this wacky idea of, he wants to do a 60-second interview with a snowboarder or a skier to basically give an idiot's guide to the Winter Olympics, because before the Winter Olympics no one talks about it, and then the moment it's on, everyone's like, whoa, this is epic. And I think she was the perfect person, because she's there, she's done the sport, she's an ex-Olympian, she's gonna be broadcasting throughout the whole tournament. And what's her brand mention? It was something to do with the National Lottery and how much they put into Winter Olympic sports. So the perfect context for the perfect story, and it's an easy getaway. But I think sometimes you get, a celebrity talking about dog food, and it's like, well, how do you relate that? We can't get there. And I think that's where those brand mentions almost go missing in these conversations. And I think if you can grab that fluidity of the guest just goes into it, then it works better.
Yeah, totally agree. I've had people pitch to me, not by 72Point, where I've just been on the phone going, but why? Why is this celebrity plugging this? I need to know the connection. There has to be a reason, because if they don't have a connection, they don't have a passion for it, it's going to be really hard to get that across in the interview. And the presenters aren't there to push a brand. They want to get the best interview. And we know you need to get your mention away, and we'll do our best to lead into it, but the guest has to be able to lead into it in a natural way. So although podcasts aren't under the same Ofcom rule, so you could get away with more than one mention, and also people can talk about their own brands, which you can't do on telly, which is quite nice. So if someone like Spencer Matthews has his clean gin, I think, so he could talk about that, which he couldn't do on TV unless he's actually involved in the production in a really, intricate way. So podcasts are more able to get those brand mentions away, but still you need a reason to get them there.
And that sort of takes me to my next question. I actually start with you, Joe, again, because you've got experience in both podcasts and TV. So in terms of a story, what separates a story that lands on TV to national radio to podcasts? Like, what is the perfect story that translates across all the platforms? Because a lot of what you've said is that's quite different to what we do in podcasts, but is there something that works well across everything, and especially with your background?
Well, podcast is trickier because they tend to be filmed quite far in advance. So with most of mine, they're like a month, 2 months. So actually anything with stats or a strong story connected is unlikely to land unless you go to one of the always on podcasts. So there are some that record every week, things like The Rest is Entertainment. I don't think they'd advertise anything, but they are on every week. So they're the ones to target for that kind of thing. But what was the question? What kind of storyline? It's just got to be really surprising, maybe controversial, because it's got to make you think, oh, that's that's something everyone's going to be talking about in the morning. So yeah, it's got to be a story that you're just like, whoa, that I didn't expect that. And then something ideally that your presenters can get involved with as well. So if it is to do with, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a fun story that we've covered. I don't know. Well, the Peppa Pig thing that was on GMB a while ago about Mummy Pig being pregnant. And it was like, whoa, this is like a worldwide story now. And it's something everyone can chat about and your kids are going to be excited about. So that would grab attention. But I'm trying to think of something more to do with like stats that you would send us. And I can't think of any examples.
Come on.
Someone help me. Yeah.
To be honest.
Jay, is there anything for you?
I think for us, I think we would always describe it as traditional breakfast radio is listened to in the car on the school run, right? We can all sort of agree on that. What are you going to go into work or on your commute to work? What are you going to get into work? You're making your coffee and your colleagues are around you. What is the one thing that you can say that's going to be like, whoa, that's interesting, right? And that's, I think, what we'd be looking for in those sort of like stats or things like that. It's like, oh my God, did you know this? But also,
I've got one, something like people only wash their bed sheets once a month.
yes,
That kind
that's
of
perfect. Yeah, exactly. So something like that, or again, something your presenters can get behind. I think that Mummy Pig example is actually a really good one because everyone's got a different experience with it, especially like the hot presenters. You've got Amanda who, she actually used to work with one of the girls that used to voice Pepper, so she's got a personal connection to it. But also, she has two daughters who grew up watching Peppa Pig, so it's like, oh my God, how are my daughters going to react to this? And you get that, personalized outlook on the story, which is really what cuts through more than, just reading a list of stats.
JM, for you?
Same as others.
Fine.
Yeah.
Let's move on to pitching now. So, we're obviously a broadcast agency. That's what we do. We have the relationships, but there'll be others that want to, attempt themselves to pitch to you. Is there advice that you've got, do's and don'ts? When's a good time to pitch? When's not a good time, etc., etc.?
What I would say with a pitch, I think to always think of what are my 3 sentences. Because when I have to pitch it to my presenters of what's coming up on the next show, the next day, I want to be able to say really clearly and concisely what the story is about, who it's going to be, and what we want to get out of that interview. So I would say to if you struggle to do that, it's probably a sign that it needs a little bit of work and a little bit of tweaking so that it is really clear. We are a morning TV show where we have got 8 minutes max to kind of get your story across. And if it's going to take a hell of a lot of explanation, you're not going to actually get anything new from the interview. You're not going to have any time to actually properly get into it. In terms of when to pitch, we're on the whole time. I think I speak for all my team when I say that, in an email age, there's never kind of like a bad time to do that. It's not kind of like we're always on our emails, we're always checking things. So there isn't kind of like a best time for that.
Yeah, I'd say, again, anytime, sort of agree. For us, maybe there's slightly an ideal time. Don't email us between 6:30 and 10. That's when the show's on. That's not ideal. But if you find like a sweet spot of like 11, when we've had our post-show debrief, we're all about to open. Yeah, we've all had a coffee. We're about to open our laptops. If you're the first thing in my inbox, I'm going to click it. So maybe that's a little trick, but then again, that's day to day. It depends what's going on. And in terms of pitching, I think it's I guess in a bit of a different way, it's how much control can we have. Like, I think we did something with Nespresso a couple of weeks ago, and it was to do with, Dua Lipa released her own range of coffees, and Amanda is the biggest Nespresso fan. I don't know if any of you listen to Heart Breakfast, but Nespresso gets a mention a lot because it's the only coffee she drinks. She takes it everywhere. She takes a coffee machine genuinely away with her on holiday because she loves Nespresso coffee that much. And we had someone come in and create all of Dua Lipa's things, and we did a taste test of them, but that was purely our idea. We just got pitched like, oh, Dua Lipa's releasing these 3 coffees, Heart Breakfast interested, and then we went, okay, right, Amanda loves Nespresso, how can we make it ours? And that's how we claim ownership of it, and that's how we can put our production heads onto it. So the more freedom we can have to play, I think, is better, but obviously not everything's going to have a stunt attached to it, and I appreciate that, but sometimes the stuntier the better.
Yeah, I would say do research who you're pitching to, because quite often we used to get like pitches to This Morning relating to presenters who weren't even on the show anymore or things like that. So have an idea, but also things like, if Nespresso, if whoever's doing the PR for that knew that Amanda was into it, maybe they did, but that's quite a strong line to come in with. We know Catherine Ryan loves her Manolo Bolani, so whatever. That's quite good if you know that the presenters are going to particularly be engaged with that brand or whatever. There's no particular good time to email me. I have 3 different email addresses, so I might miss things. So maybe if I don't respond, feel free to follow up. But normally I would come back at some point if it's something of interest. And if it is someone I really want, I'll come back quite quickly. Yeah.
Can I just hop on to the end of that?
Cool.
Obviously you mentioned knowing your brand. I think I get a lot of like random PR emails about like occasionally quite negative things. And I always think when they come through, I'm like, Heart's slogan genuinely is turn up the feel good. It's said about 7 times an hour, every hour. And I'm just thinking like, why would you send that to me? I'm evidently not the best person. And I think when you approach pitching, really think about the brand you're pitching to, because that, to me, I wouldn't even reply to that email. That would just get lost in my inbox because it doesn't even align with the brand, let alone the presenters. It doesn't align with the brand as a whole.
Just to say, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes so more with our panel, and then we'll throw to you for some questions. So please do have a think if there's any questions you want to ask, and Jaya will be running around with the mic in about 10-15 minutes time. On pitching, how far in advance should people pitching? So, for example, the World Cup starts tomorrow. If in April, brands were thinking about the World Cup, is that too early? Is it a week, 10 days before? Is it, the day before? How does it work for each of you?
I think if you've got a great name, it's never too early. If someone said to me that they've got Joanna Lumley in 6 weeks' time, we'd book it in. I would say it's probably typically looking at like a fortnight in advance now. It used to be, back before ITV had changes, I think we were booking actually further in advance than that. But now we're becoming a lot more kind of topical. We want it to be kind of like what is in the news that day. So it is probably, no more than kind of the fortnight. I've got things like, properly concrete in. But with the right name, we will look further ahead for sure.
Yeah, I think we're the exact same. I think the only thing that I would change to that is maybe we're a bit more weekly. For a little bit of a Heart Breakfast secret, we have a content meeting every Wednesday. So that is literally to look at the next week. So normally the show is majority, with a few gaps, planned on the Wednesday for the following week. So if you can get in, Monday to Tuesday and we like it and we're resonating with it, typically we can get it on for you either the tail end of that week or the next week, because that's when we're going to be planning for. But then again, if the name carries that much weight and there's so much extra conversation to have with a person like Joanna Lumley, we'd take that 10 weeks in advance and it will just sit in our calendar, and then we'll circle back to you when it comes. But it won't be a constant conversation for 10 weeks. It will just be when it comes, we'll know it's there. It'll be in our calendar and we'll all come find you when we need it.
Mine's more tied to when I'm recording, which the dates are so random. None of mine are like we record every Thursday. Some are June for July and some are July for October. So at any time, and pitching really near the date isn't always a bad idea because sometimes you have dropouts. So it's, if you've got a great name and they're available in 3 days' time, one of these shows, or I might have a slot, so it's never too late.
We will always try to make it work. If you're pitching something that's an opportunity we can't refuse, we will find a way to make it work.
And is there an example of a pitch or even a campaign that you've put on air that on paper got sent to you, the calls, everything was right, and then it's translated differently and it just hasn't been the same on air? And is there any advice that you can give us to avoid that?
I come back to me on an example of one that went on air, but I've got an example of one where it was pitched very kind of vaguely, and then as kind of the time went on, the things that we were initially offered didn't materialize, and then you just end up not going ahead with it. You're having your time kind of messed around with. You've got to be pretty confident that you've definitely got time with the person you're pitching, I would say. Really be clear about whether they can come into our studio or down the line. Because I think when we initially get pitched something and it's like, yeah, it'll be in studio, and then it becomes, oh, actually, no, it'll need to be remote. And then it's, oh, actually, they can't do it live at your time that you're on air. Can you do a pre-record? That's when that's switch off. And
When it becomes hard one.
yeah.
Any examples from the two of you?
I'm just having a think if you'll go first.
I'm trying to think. It's when it becomes a lot of hard work for. I'm thinking more of things at this morning, and we've had some great. I know what's good with pitching is when you're really clear and open from the start. Who the brand is. So, because if I get an email offering me George Clooney, and I know he hasn't got a film out, I know there's a brand attached. So I don't want to waste time going, and who's it for? Just be honest. Just say this brand is attached. These are the stats. Da, da, da. And what else was I going to say? And anything else that the brand requires to get on air. So if there's going to be restrictions further down the line, I'd rather know now. If something has to be said, or we have to get something in, or they have to be wearing something in particular, we really need to know that up front so that can all be cleared.
I think I've actually got one example. We launched a segment on Heart Breakfast months ago called Stump the Specialist, and it was basically a way for kids to ask the questions to, their dream careers. So we've had astronauts, we've had doctors, we've had racing car drivers, we've had the lot. And we had one TV doctor, I'm not going to name names, and he came on, we answered some questions, and they had some sort of mention about hay fever stats or something like that, and I can't really remember what it was, but we closed the chat, we did the segment, mics went down, music's playing, and we ended up getting a phone call from his agent saying that we didn't get the brand mention away. And for Hot Breakfast, things are quick moving. You're on for 4 minutes. If it's a big enough guest, we might hold you over 2 links, but most things are 1 link and go. And we actually had to bring the doctor back to do the brand mention, and then he missed it again. And the agent was still badgering us, and we're like, we can't give this another hit. Our audience have moved on. And the segment's gone. You can't re-stump the specialist, right? We've stumped him. So I think it's really about how well can your talent deliver that message, because it's our show. We don't need to pander to the brand mention. So you've got to have your trust in that person that they can deliver the brand. I think there are a few people that I could name that are brilliant at it, like Paul C. Brunson. He's the best in the game at getting a brand mention away. If you get Paul C. Brunson, he'll get your brand away. There was also one we had, the Whitehall mum and dad, Hillary and Michael, and they had a brand mention of Specsavers hearing tests, and Michael did it so subtly, but because they're both old, when you have them talk about a hearing test, you're like, oh, he genuinely might have just gone for a hearing test. It didn't sound like a brand mention, and I think that's when you really get that golden moment of that was smooth. And we all know it. We all say it to each other. We're like, that's a good brand mention.
We had a good one, Specsavers hearing test too. I think it was back on This Morning. Rick Astley talked about basically losing his hearing, and that our audience love Rick Astley. He's one of those daytime dream guests, and wow, pop star losing his hearing. That's a bit of a news story. So actually getting the brand mention in was quite smooth, because you would go for a hearing test. Yes, it happens to be Specsavers, but there was an editorial reason for doing that story and for having him on.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Both those examples, connection to the brand. So it's naturally going to come up. It's not going to be jarring for the viewer.
And also you need to, as you were saying, you need to have, the guest needs to be on it. So you could have, if you had Gemma Collins for a brand, we'd all jump at Gemma Collins because she's good value. But you've got to know she's going to do her homework. This is a woman who not only didn't write her own book, she didn't read it. So you've got to know that she's going to come up with those stats for you and deliver for you, because our job as the broadcaster is not to get your brand mentioned. We will, because that we know that's part of the deal, but we're worried we're going to get like fined by Ofcom. So we're being cautious, and that's why we always say only one mention. But and I appreciate you've got to brief them to get that mention in, but they need to be well rehearsed, don't they?
Which I think is a big part that we play, which is how important those briefings are in advance, because it's all very well lining up Gemma Collins as example, but when
Don't repeat that outside this room.
don't worry, I've got a story about her, but I won't tell that. But you know, the briefing is the most important thing, because ultimately, you know, the relationship, whether it be us or whoever in the room, is, you know, is important. And you know, if they come on and call you and tell you to get another brand mentioned in, it's just going to damage that relationship going forward. Finally, before we go to sort of questions, if there was one bit of advice that you would give to not experienced people in the room about, you know, trying to get their brand, trying to get a spokesperson on your outlets, what's that sort of one crucial bit? And there's a lot of information you've given us over the last 40 minutes or so, but what's that one bit of advice that they can take away from this afternoon? I'll start with you, JM.
I would go back to the thing I said about being able to put it into 3 sentences about what's going to be. Obviously, you know, more information below, but kind of like if you've got the top of your email, 3 sentences, which I can understand and I can feel like, God, I could put that on air tomorrow. You're onto a winner. That will be my answer.
I'd say know your brand is the most important. Like, I think, you know, turn up the feel good is the slogan of Heart. And like I said, I get plenty of emails that aren't turn up the feel good at all. And I think that's where I just lose interest. Like, it's not even a question of not wanting to help you, because most of the time you guys are giving us content. You're helping me fill a schedule that needs to get filled. The show's on every day. But if you're talking to me about the stats on how many people are, you know, struggling with their mental health or getting depression and things like that, it doesn't resonate with our audience, because I don't know how many of you speak to your parents about mental health, but, you know, mums don't really buy it. But yeah, that's that.
Oh, hey.
Sorry.
And I'm just going to repeat what I was saying about the connection between the talent and the brand. It's got to be really clear.
Excellent. Well, hopefully there's some real insight from all 3 of our guests for each of you. Questions now. So if you've got a question, if you want to pop your hand up, and Jaya will come to you with the question.
Hi. JM, you talked about having the really clear 3 sentences, and that makes complete sense. But would you guys each give me a good example and maybe a bad example of like a subject line for someone sending you an email with a pitch?
That's a good question. I would say that the name of the talent that you're working with, the date is always good to know, because if it's for tomorrow, that means I'm going to be thinking, right, okay, well, I need to get back to that straight away. Whereas if it's vague, it might not stand out to me. And then in a couple of words, like the summary of what it's about, what is it they're talking about.
Yeah, I would say for me it's subject, so what they're on to talk about, and then talent. The date for me isn't as important, and I don't mean this in disrespect to anyone in this room, but I will play with the date. Like, sometimes if, you know, we were talking about 72Point have a sleep expert for the World Cup, you guys have attached a date to that, but we might have a full show on that date, but a sleep expert for the World Cup that's happening where the games are at 3 a.m. That's a great topic for us. Everyone in their office is talking about it. We might want to do that next Monday, even though the World Cup's already started. So the date for us is a bit hit or miss. But I would say the subject and talent is, I guess, more important for me.
Yeah, I'd say if there's no talent attached, then that strong like stat, you know, that people wash their sheets once a month or something like that. And if there is talent, yeah, the talent and the story. Tom Daly on not drowning in the summer. You know, that I'm like, well, yeah, okay, got it.
Thank you for your question. Who else has got a question?
How important is exclusivity? Like, if somebody's already booked for another show, or you know that they've got something else going on, do you prioritize trying to get them on first?
For us, it's first TV is really important. If they're doing radio, we might be able to make that work. Obviously, we like to be the very first. That's fantastic, but sometimes we know that's not always possible. People's schedules and stuff. But first TV, absolutely.
I think everyone wants to be first, right? I think that's a guarantee. I think I work for Global own Heart, and Global also own Capital, Smooth, Classic FM, Gold, Radio X. So there's every chance that when you pitch to me, you're also probably pitching to Capital. The audiences aren't that dissimilar. They are slightly, but they're not that dissimilar. So I think we can always understand that we're not going to have exclusivity, and I think that's fine for us. It's not really an issue. But I think that's why I mentioned so many times during this talk that our control over it is more important to us than exclusivity, because then we can textualize it for our audience and we make it something that Amanda and Jamie can get behind, and then our audience can get behind it because they're getting behind it. Whereas if we're the third radio station to talk about it, that's not going to change anything, because at the end of the day, Heart listeners are Heart listeners, so they wouldn't have heard it on Capital, Smooth, Radio X. I always liken it to when Taylor Swift went on Travis Kelce's podcast. That happened, that got announced, the trailer dropped at like 4 a.m. Every breakfast show in the country was talking about it. It was the biggest news story in the world. But everyone had their own take on it, and that is where it's important. It's not so much about being the first to hit it. Obviously, that's always nice, but it's how can we frame it for our audience to make it something exciting.
For podcasts, not so important because they all have different themes, presenters, and make it their own. But you do want to know that guest isn't doing everything else. So just be open about, we've already got them booked on this, and this. Back, if I want to put my This Morning head on, it was always first daytime TV. So they would usually follow the one show, but would not want to follow GMB or Morning Live or any other daytime show that was on before them. They don't care who you do after you.
Lovely. Thank you for your question. Another question at the front?
Sorry, my throat's a little sore. But from your perspective, what are the biggest mistakes that brands make when selecting celebrity talent, and what should we be looking for beyond a name? So I work for Eurostar. We have a lot of celebrities that reach out and talent. I've had some great experience with talent, some not so great. But I'd really love your sort of opinion on that.
I guess it's that connection to the brand again. Like for Eurostar, you probably want Thierry Henry or someone who goes between France and England all the time. So something like that. Or you'd still take Stacey Solomon, wouldn't you? Talking about the Eurostar, because then but you want a nice original story about her and her kids and how do you coordinate taking 6 people and what do you do with your pets and all that kind of thing. Can you take pets on the Eurostar?
No.
Okay. So yeah, I think it's just someone who can talk about it and has experience of it. Yeah, I don't really know what to say.
That's why the people you work with, they've got to be great talkers, because if they're going to come on and they're going to stumble over it, it's just going to then be really awkward for our viewers. So it's got to be someone who's like, I always say Kerry Katona is a brilliant guest. People might be like, well, she's not like the most A-list name, but she comes on and she will talk for 8 minutes about anything and everything. She's great for that, and she brings that energy that we need from morning TV.
Yeah, I'd say unless it's a really heavy topic, you want someone who's just lols and really likable. So 72Point were pitching Judy Love for the Maltesers campaign. Anyone will take Judy Love anytime, because she's just great energy, great fun. She can speak about serious things as well. We've seen her on Loose Women, and she could riff about anything, and you're going to get a great interview. So I wouldn't say.
I've actually got more.
Have you?
Yes.
I wouldn't put her with every single brand going, but she's a banker. Yeah.
So I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Question at the back.
Yeah, that's. So I suppose TV and radio are kind of what we'd consider more traditional forms of media, podcast a bit more recent, but media as a whole is evolving very, very quickly, especially in the last couple of years. Where do you guys see your specific sort of fields of that industry evolving in the next couple of years?
What I would say is TV is becoming more conscious of having a presence on social media. We're doing a lot more now, making sure that those key interviews are going across our social media channels. We're seeing some of them do really well for us. But say, of course, that it's still important for us to rate well, to still be on TV and connecting with our audience live. So, yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. But I think for us, it's about being more mindful of the fact that it's not just about being live on ITV every morning now. We've got to think about how we're connecting with people throughout the day because people are consuming media differently.
I think I guess I'll speak across the whole of Global. Global recently have publicly announced their new business strategy is video first. That's open public knowledge. And that is a big push. Everything will go on social media, but we won't put someone's brand mention on socials. But if there's a moment where everyone in the studio is absolutely howling with laughter, I'm telling you, our social media producers clipping that up and putting it on our socials. And that we hope will then translate to, going back and listening. I personally, as someone who works in radio, don't believe people do, which is a shame. But I think that is what I guess the goal is, because Global are never going to stop producing radio, but we do acknowledge the fact that everything now needs to be visualized, and we are currently in the process as a company in implementing that. We're not quite there yet, but that is the trajectory that we're heading in.
Yeah, same. All the podcasts are now video as well as audio. Like, the audio is particularly good, but everything is video too, and all the best bits are clipped up for TikTok, Instagram, Facebook a little bit, but that's just for us old people. But it's that you're thinking about online, you're thinking about viral moments. That's also something to think. I know you were talking about making it your own and making those moments, but if you've got a strong idea, like going back to this morning, we had Tom Daly was pitched to talk about swimming safely in the summer because there was a higher incidence of drowning, and the PR suggested he comes on and does the weather in his trunks. So yeah, why not? So that's what we did outside TV Centre. Tom Daly in his trunks. The whole Loose Women audience happened to be queuing up as well, which just added to the atmosphere. And then we got our moment. They got their plug, and it all went online as well, and everyone was happy. So those moments, everyone's looking for those little moments, and everything's going on all the socials as well.